Everything I've said is true. It's real.
Dinosaur fossils? I'd like to put those here to test our faith.
A damn lie. I saw him with my own eye.
Did IQs just drop sharply while I was away?
We did illusions, man. None of it is true.
Anointed!
This is mass madness, you maniacs. In God's name, you people are the real thing. We are the illusion.
So first of all, thank you for checking this episode out, everybody. Appreciate you being here. And I apologize for my horrible voice. I'm definitely getting sick. It's odd too. I quit nicotine for the first time since I was 18. So I read about it. You can get like the flu basically from quitting. And yeah, that's what it feels like. It just hit me like a ton of bricks. So we're going to push through it. I'm not going to talk as much as Duane anyway, because he's going to be bringing the heat here. But Duane Hayes, welcome back to the Deep Share podcast. Bulletproof Publishers represent. Thank you for being here, man. How's it going?
Awesome. Couldn't be happier. Done a lot of work here. We probably should have done this about 2 months ago, really, but I just found so much work, so much other information that was relevant and pertinent to everything that's going on today that I had to just keep following that down the hole. And so the result was a 10-part series, and you've been gracious enough with your time. I know you're a busy guy, and so you've given us here a platform to release all of this information, all of this work that I've done over the last, I don't know, 6 months even, but going back into the summer, I started to do this, preparing for this show.
Yeah, when we first started talking about it.
Yeah, at the end of the summer.
Yeah, my take on it was going to be like it was going to be our third episode together. You know, we're like, okay, let's do the rise of the expert. Let's cover that whole angle, and we were going to do it like in one episode at first, and then you were like, this is going to probably have to be a multi-parter. And then, you know, as time progressed, we would keep talking, and it would suddenly be like, this is gaining momentum. This is turning into a massive avalanche of data, and yeah, I love what you've done with it, and it's going to be a killer presentation for sure.
Cool.
And
I did it all, I wrote it actually all in one article. I just kept writing it in one, and then broke it up into, you know, manageable pieces. And so it turned into, you know, 10 parts, wrote half a book almost, maybe in 5 or 6 months. But this information, man, is super relevant to today. It holds within it all of the answers to the questions that everybody has. And I couldn't think of a more appropriate show to start this on than one called The Deep Share. So I appreciate it with all your help and everything, Andy.
Likewise, brother. Likewise. So I guess without further ado, let's get into the heart of it. We're talking about this whole concept of the expert that, of course, over the past few years has definitely gained quite a bit of turmoil that it may not have had before, but it should have. And now our eyes are being slowly pried open to basically the roots of our social contract and how we, like the picture of the American dream, quote unquote, that has now basically fully presented itself, and where that comes from and what the real underbelly of it is. And it's pretty dark.
Well, it's pretty deep. I would say that. I find it is dark, but it really is in its form, you know, it's enlightening, because it really shows us how they designed all this and the thoughts that went behind our daily lives. And it is that I just stumbled across this, being, you know, the origins of our social contract is probably the best, most concise way that I could say it. And yeah, that was about 10 days ago that I realized that what we were looking into was just that, our social contract, the creation of our modern day social contract, that you know, and really what that is the matrix. Because when Morpheus talks about it, you know, we can feel it when we pay our taxes and all of these other different ways that we can feel the matrix, but we can't quite see it. Well, these are all the things that this guy, Louis Brandeis, Supreme Court Justice, really brought into effect through being first an attorney in the early years of the 1900s, and then in the second decade of the 1900s becomes, Woodrow Wilson's most trusted personal advisor. He's elected Supreme Court Justice in 1913, and he becomes the head of essentially world Zionism in 1914. And he's designing, domestic and foreign American policy all at the same time, including the creation of Israel. Through this research, we've also uncovered just how deeply involved he is in the creation of Israel, working side by side, in tandem, in concert with the House of Rothschild. And so that'll be episode 3 or 4 somewhere. I think that's a 2-parter, just because that itself is pretty deep. So
Yeah.
Louis Brandeis is the guy. He's going to be the point of interest here for the next 10 episodes. And so
he's basically the origin point of what we would call this whole expertise styled form of education and presentation in society, at least in the West here, that we have today.
Yep. And he's roommates essentially at the House of Truth with Walter Lippmann. And you and I have gone through the House of Truth on previous episodes, and Walter Lippmann's considered the father of modern journalism. And so he's a Fabian Society member, but he's best friends with Graham Wallace, who's a Fabian founder. And Graham Wallace writes the book, The Great Society. And so Walter Lippmann helps promote and popularize that term. Lippmann uses the good society in his book, but he routinely throughout his career was talking about the Great Society, a scientifically managed or governed society. And so what we see is that Walter Lippmann is setting this all up through creating modern journalism. And what is modern journalism really but, the opinion of the scientific expert these days? Almost nearly every headline says experts say, or some form of appeal to authority that is similar. So Brandeis, working with Lippmann and several other members at this House of Truth, Brandeis is the eldest, I believe. Oliver Wendell Holmes is probably older, but Brandeis is the one that really enacts this administrative state. The intelligence bureaus that Walter Lippmann talks about in public opinion, that he feels is going to be the only form of government that's really going to work, is where they create this giant administrative state, and within each one there's an expert that takes care of every aspect of American life. So when you look at the creation of the administrative state, that starts with the Federal Reserve and the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC and the Fed. Those are both considered today designs, concepts derived straight from Brandeis's mind. And so at any point here you wish, I can share the screen and we can start going into some detail, because I'd like to actually start with his youth and just sort of create a background as to the environment that he grew up in. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. I think you should be able to share the screen. I
haven't used Zoom in a while.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah.
Now, is that my sound stuff?
Yeah, that's your sound stuff.
Let me see. I'm used to the other one now.
Excellent logo, by the way. I had to snag that and use it for our show.
Yeah, are you seeing that now? The American flag with Brandeis in the front?
Absolutely. The new freedom, the new competition. I love that, man. Just like, because we've gone over the word new multiple times, and I quote you and essentially Lippmann as well, many times online, just to point out how many of this word new was so manufactured and pushed into our modern thinking.
Yeah. And that's really language of the progressives. And that is the New World Order. These guys, I have said for a long time, put new in New World Order because of the books that were written all in 1913. And everybody go back to bulletproofpub.com and check out some of the articles there. And we go into that. And the previous episodes that I've appeared here on the Deep Share, we have discussions just like this on on the House of Truth. Everything really starts there. So it's important to know who's coming and going from the House of Truth, this political salon in Northwest Washington. So I invite everybody to go and look into the article on bulletproofpub.com called The Devil's Agent, the House of Truth. There's two
And just
there, but I'd rather you read The Devil's Agent. It's more complete and it looks nicer.
beautiful. Yeah, there's many articles on there, and you guys are really building a comprehensive timeline, and the details are just filling in more and more as the articles keep coming.
Yeah. And that's what we're trying to do. We're just trying to document as we are researching. And so that's what this is. It's a great opportunity for us to release our latest information. And so on this picture, I just wanted to include all of the catch terms that we're going to get used to and understand here over the next 10 weeks. These all have to do with Louis Brandeis and the ways in which he infiltrated all aspects of our lives.
Taylorism, jurisprudence,
Yeah. So, it's all towards an industrial democracy. So Lippmann and Graham Wallace talk about a great society being a scientifically governed one, and Brandeis says the same thing. He just calls it industrial democracy, and actually Graham Wallace or Sidney and Beatrice Webb write a book called Industrial Democracy in 1902, and this all sort of spills out of that as we see. So Louis Brandeis, there he is as a young kid. He was born in 1856 in Louisville to Adolph and Frederica. So Adolph Brandeis and Frederica Dembitz. Those are two key family names. The Brandeis family originated from a small city on the river near Prague, Czech Republic, called Brandeis on the Elbe. So this establishes that they're coming from somewhere that is named after them. Like, not named after their family, but their family name is prevalent and has been for, generations prior to Louis. So he grew up one of 4 children, and his family were followers of the radical Yakov Frank or Jacob Frank.
No way.
So he starts.
I did not know
Frankism.
that.
Yeah, and so that's a sort of degenerate antinomianism or a rejection of all moral and social norms. And the Brandeis family, part of a long rabbinical line of social reformers. Adolf himself, a liberal revolutionary who moved his young family to the States, narrowly escaping the fallout of the 1848 Austrian Revolution. So his dad is a liberal radical.
Plenty of fuel for the fire.
Right. And so here's something that we just, is it this one? Oh, it's
I can't, the Frankist connection is alarming.
So many people are going to be unfamiliar with Frankism. Just go and look into it. It's
I've spoken about it on my show as well many times. It's the opposite of a religion, it seems. It's literally, as Robert Sepper put it in his book 1666, redemption through sin. Like seeking out the most profane and disgusting and just horrible behavior and beliefs to aim your way back into heaven or something. It's deep and dark for sure.
And so in 1848, Adolf was chosen as a representative by the oldest members of the Brandeis, Dembitz, and Whale families to travel to North America as an envoy or a scout to study American conditions and select a location. And so that is taken from Brandeis, A Free Man's Life, Alpheus Thomas Mason. He is one of several official Brandeis biographers that we talk about here.
Wow.
So here's what's interesting. Is that Adolf arrived in New York, traveled for a while in the East, and then went on to the agricultural Middle West, visiting farms and villages along the way. Young Brandeis's pleasure and facility in travel were greatly enhanced by the companionship of a young friend of the Wales, then on a business trip to the United States to secure information about American investments for the House of Rothschild.
Perfect.
So,
Jesus.
Louis not even born yet, and his dad is, Rothschild's riding shotgun. They're going out there on horse and buggy, and they've got a Rothschild agent with them, and they are pioneering into new areas of America.
This seems all so perfect. Like just all put together so perfectly. So like Louis' rise is obviously like foretold in this family.
Yeah, and there's obviously a mission that goes back beyond even modern
Yes,
day. And so when you look at
absolutely.
where they come from, Prague and Bohemia and that part of Prussia, right?
Right.
A lot of American culture comes from there. So this all amounting to a strange chapter in the biography of an eventual member of the US Supreme Court and advisor to the US president. And despite many efforts to suppress his upbringing, it remains after all these years still true. And the present day narrative surrounding Brandeis remains largely apologetic, if not completely dismissive of his many obvious and concerning conflicts of both interest and character. So we're starting to see that this guy, I mean, this is the life that he's born into. And
Literally. Yeah.
yeah, and so we start to see that this starts to creep out into his public life. You start to see that it happens. I mean, he marries his second cousin, and so that is a certain
Frankism.
degree of tabooness. I mean,
Yep.
if I think about marrying my second cousin, that would be pretty disturbing. So, uh, Brandeis's grandfather and great grandfather in Prague had been leaders in this Frankist cult that swept Central Europe in the late 18th century. So you can see that it's a long line.
Mm.
Brandeis is just the latest representative. So Jacob Frank slept with his followers and maybe even his daughter. He preached a nihilistic doctrine that saw this world as intrinsically corrupt and believed that the best way to imitate God was to cross every boundary, transgress every taboo, and mix the sacred with the profane, which is what Andy just said. And
Well
now
put
that's not
here.
okay. So we have sources. We are saying that, but we're taking that from Rabbi J. Michelson, PhD in Jewish thought, Hebrew University. So if there's anybody that could, be a spokesman for all of Jewish thought, maybe it's him. He's
Oh,
JD
and
Yale Law School,
he's
and
involved
he's
in gender studies as well now, of
right.
course.
And
Oh, gender studies in religion.
yes, and it's all based out of religion. So he's got the Chicago Theological Seminary.
Mm,
So he knows his religion. He knows his Jewish religion, and he knows his history of Brandeis, certainly.
hmm
But that's they're not talking like that on MSNBC. This is a personal document or paper that he'd written.
hmm
And so, these things are there and the mainstream does know of them. They just aren't amplifying them for sure.
No, and there's again, we have a lack of, interest at this depth of the stories
Yes.
in the public eye. Nobody has
Yeah.
time. I think slowly but surely people are making more time. Let's
Yep.
hope, you know.
Yeah. And you know what, Andy? This isn't all that far underneath the surface.
It's not. It's hiding
You know?
mostly in plain sight,
Yeah. And this is what all the distraction is all about. I really do believe that a lot of the gatekeeping is to keep particularly this guy, but
Mm.
in general, the progressive movement, out of public purview. And
We never
understand.
mention, we never hear any of our bigwig alternative thinking rebels anywhere talking about the progressive movement specifically. The
No,
word
that's true.
progressive has kind of been left behind
Mhm.
in terms of bringing up arguments against it or anything. It's kind of just,
Yeah.
we talk about
So
the woke movement, and
right,
it
and
sounds so
so
childish.
at the beginning of this, I said that a lot of the answers for our questions are found in this work,
hmm
and that
hmm
is one of them. To understand this woke culture and where it came from is really established here too through Brandeis.
Well, especially, I mean, real quick, I'll let you
Yep.
go on right
Yep.
after this, but just the connection to the Frankist ideal and the Sabbatian,
Right.
or what is it, the Sabbatai Zevi idea
Yep.
of, seeking God through the profane, the
Yep.
woke society and what it's all leading to. And
Yeah.
it makes sense that this is kind of set up in a Frankist kind of worldview.
Totally, man. When you see that angle, you can start to see that that's actually what's going on in our world.
hmm
Yeah. And so um, Louis Brandeis had a portrait of Frank's daughter, Eva, on his desk at the Supreme Court, an heirloom he received from his Dembitz relatives, whose ancestors were followers of Frank. So
That's
Brandeis
bizarre.
eventually marrying Alice Goldmark, his second cousin and daughter of prominent Austrian chemist, the discoverer of red phosphorus, Joseph Goldmark. Now, Joseph Goldmark, we did talk a little bit about that through Messenger, that he's the father of 7 daughters, which is
Yeah.
interesting.
hmm
But they are very active, especially 3 of them, in the progressive movement and women's suffrage. And, as we will see through the series, they become very important to Brandeis, the Goldmark, both his wife, but his sister-in-law, I guess we would call her, but they're both really his second cousins. So despite his family not being able to afford it, young Lewis somehow enters Harvard Law. His family is well off. Obviously, if Rothschilds are riding shotgun in your pioneering days out into the West, as a manifest destiny type of idea, there's money coming from somewhere. And so this kind of explains a little bit of how he even gets into Harvard and at such a young age. He's walking the hallowed halls of the Ivy League just shy of his 19th birthday, graduating in 1877, class valedictorian, cum laude, Phi Beta Kappa Society at the age of 20. They had to change some sort of internal Harvard rule to allow him to graduate at 20. So he is a smart guy. And, he was trained. He went back to Germany to train when he was a child, went to for 2 years of specialized study, as a lot of these characters do, but it's usually post grad that they go. Louis went when he was not even, it was before his Harvard days that he went and learned all of this. And so you see that he's sort of an omniscient character and a sage advisor to all. And so he's studied, he's very learned, very intelligent. He's no dummy,
right?
And so here's a picture of him at Harvard, class of 1877, right there in the circle. And he is known throughout his entire class as the smartest guy there. There's stories about, guys losing their books and walking around through classes looking for their books, and their friends telling them to go ask Brandeis. He'll probably know where their lost book is. So he's a legend already before he leaves there. And it's really a lifelong career that he spends there, even though he's a Supreme Court justice and he does all of these other things. His ties to Harvard never break. He's very close there. He's constantly lecturing at Harvard and doing all kinds of extracurricular activities there, himself, and through his lieutenants, Frankfurter and Julian Mack, and these guys that we're going to meet through this series. So here's what somebody said about Brandeis. I've got the sources at the bottom here.
Okay.
We've got about, I'd say, close to 30 just on this story.
That's
because
excellent.
We've got 18 in the list here, but then there's some that we just offer throughout the body of the work. And so this quote I'm about to read is from the Brandeis Confirmation a Century Later, Oxford University, Paul Finkelman and Lance J. Sussman. And they talk about how Brandeis was a forerunner of other social activist lawyers who were later appointed to the court, such as Thurgood Marshall and Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Now, those are big names on the left, right?
Oh, yeah. Like pious names.
Yep. And so Brandeis is really the forerunner. He's the pioneer of creating a social activist Supreme Court justices. And this is why I start with this story, because just on a very basic level, we see a conflict of interest.
Absolutely.
We don't have to start imagining anything. The fact that he's a social activist and a Supreme Court justice are two conflicting ideas.
Absolutely.
Maybe not so obvious today, but super obvious then. And these are
and I think there's a lot of young people out there that could listen to this and be like, I don't understand why that's a problem. Shouldn't we have some sort of conscious guy in office that's not going to just be some cog in a machine? Maybe, if the machine's already corrupt, but it's never for our benefit when there's any sort of social justice being enacted at this kind of scale or this level.
Yeah, they are just using social justice, social sciences to manipulate and steer society. That's really
Absolutely
what sociology and the social sciences were created for. All of this comes from Prussia, as we will show.
Hell yeah.
So today in American academia, it seems strange that Brandeis's reputation still stands strong some 80 years after his passing in 1941. It's almost as if people have been deliberately kept from looking deeper into the man. Brandeis remains a respected and revered beacon of modern social justice movements, and Brandeis University stands today as an institution to Brandeis's radical progressive ideals. We see that they were the first private university to shut down any pro-Palestinian protests on university campuses in America. So you see that they are still wielding power here, and suppressive power, not allowing people to speak, especially those that are being oppressed. So that story that we are being told from the mainstream media over in the Middle East is about as backwards as reality is. They've really fed us a pseudo environment. This is what Walter Lippmann talked about, was creating a pseudo environment.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Pseudo environment and the effective environment don't match at all. I would say that Israel's been the aggressor there since November 1917 and the publication of the Balfour Declaration. I mean, it's pretty obvious. And when we get into this, you will see that it's even worse than what we thought.
Yeah, because it's not just the Balfour. I mean, people a lot of time like plant their flag solely on the Balfour Declaration, but I mean that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg when it comes down to it. And we won't get into it in this series particularly, but for the audience, the chats that you, me, and Andy have behind the scenes, text and my ranting audio clips that I send you guys, like this doesn't just go back to the late 1800s. This is a plot that has many moving parts and many different chapters to it. And Duane and his work has uncovered such a vast amount of it that's so relevant to the world we see now. While I'm a lot of times busy trying to fill in the back parts of it, you're filling in all this relevant information for the past century and a half. And it's like, it's just unreal to see how and where and why these different periods of history are starting to line up. And the deception is kind of starting to take shape finally. And again, chapters and chapters of a deception that has changed shape over time as well, over centuries. But just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, and they are all related. And so that is what we are doing. That is the ultimate mission, is to connect, old ancient times with what is happening here in modernity, because we are seeing extensions all the way back into ancient times, and this sort of pursuit of certainty, pursuit of scientific control of society, this pursuit of world dominance is something that's been going on since the beginning of time. And so we're just experiencing the most modern, technologically advanced version of it.
Yeah, man, it's like the reboot or just like the newer sequels to a old movie series, and it's coming undone.
Well, they say that history rhymes, and it's totally obvious that it does. History repeats, and that is how we learn how to not repeat history, is by learning what happened.
Absolutely.
And so that this is why this work, in my opinion, is just so critical, is to understand our history, to see how they deceived and tricked us, and so that we go forward not being tricked again. And it's just the same as learning logical fallacy. Once you learn logical fallacy and how it's wielded against us, you can't unlearn those things, and you just become more powerful.
Absolutely.
Less manipulatable, and that's all better for your own individuality and your own spirit. So
that's the goal.
When a critical analysis of Brandeis is honestly undertaken, this humanitarian man of the people persona quickly becomes a contrived and disingenuous cover story for a man with many faces, who is only now being burdened with the appropriate historical weight earned from such a prolonged and prolific career of anti-constitutional and anti-American radical social reform. So we do feel that at Bulletproof, we're kind of opening some doors that have never been opened before, and we're not sure what's going to happen, but we are dedicated to telling the truth. And so in respect to both the Brandeis family and you, the reader, we at bulletproofpub.com recognize the large responsibility that comes with exposing past lies agreed upon, and have painstakingly searched out and procured a collection of the most legitimate and trusted source material, extracting primary and secondary artifacts from the personal writings of Brandeis, his family, his close friends, and his many, many business associates. We've borrowed vigorously from the archives of several prestigious universities, including Brandeis's very own, compiling dozens of doctoral dissertations from recognized and award-winning authors who were given unfettered access to the Brandeis personal papers. And as a result, we have compiled and cataloged a near library of related material in an effort to gain greater context of both the man and the times in which he lived. So we're trying to be responsible. We're trying to go through this in a deductive, logical, reasonable way, because making our society a better place is serious to me, and defeating energies that are trying to suppress all of humanity is important to me. And so how important it is shows in just how far we're willing to go. And so
Yeah, absolutely. Your thorough work is definitely proof,
well, there's
of
two
your
things.
sincerity.
There's two things that are important, right, when we talk about journalism, and that is it true, and is it in the public interest? And I would say yes to both of those emphatically. So here we get into his relationship with Woodrow Wilson, and why he's called the architect of the New Freedom. So the New Freedom is really Wilson's presidential platform. And this is where a large government run by a scientific expert really gets established. And this is really like the girders and the underpinnings of the New World Order. Louis Brandeis laying the groundwork here for more to come. And you can see that they started here with Wilson, with domestic policy, with the creation of the administrative state, because they needed to first establish this concept of expert, but they needed to have it in, as institutions. They needed to institutionalize it. So to do that, you need brick and mortar. You have to have actual established buildings to work out of. So you can see that this is where, the Federal Reserve is created in 1913. And
you need a
the
foundation.
FDC.
You need this monster to have a background, otherwise it won't be taken seriously.
Yeah. And so at the end of August, Wilson sought one contributor in particular, but not for his money. Wilson needed somebody to sharpen his message. He wanted to discuss the issue with the most incisive mind on the subject. Fortunately, that man had already expressed an interest in his campaign, though when he shuttled from Boston to New York by night boat August 27th, Louis Brandeis could not have known that he, as much as anybody, could shape the future of Woodrow Wilson's campaign and career. So they meet August 27th. This is less than 2 weeks after Brandeis meets Jacob de Haas, and de Haas allegedly inspires Brandeis into the Zionist movement. So he meets de Haas for the first time and Woodrow Wilson for the first time within 2 weeks in the 3 months leading up to Wilson's election as president. So so what they're talking about here is how they were going to control the trusts and monopoly, because this is really what's going on back in that day, right? Standard Oil is being broken up, and they're having these trust busting commissions and committees and investigations and Brandeis is actually leading a lot of these. And Brandeis is Phi Beta Kappa, and so are a lot of the people that oppose him. So I think what we're seeing is a controlled opposition there. They control both counsel for the government and the opposition to it.
Okay,
because
that makes sense.
Taft is William Howard Taft is Phi Beta Kappa Skull and Bones, and he's leading the 8-judge bar association that opposes Brandeis's election or a confirmation to the Supreme Court. So I think it's all just sort of a fabricated complaint against Brandeis. I think that they all wanted him in there, and so we see that he gets in there regardless of all of the blowback, because really the fight takes from nomination to confirmation 5 months or something, and I think we get into that here.
That is interesting that Phi Beta Kappa wasn't standing kind of unitarily on one of their members like that, or I guess it could be simple power struggle, but yeah, it could be controlled opposition as well, kind of. Yeah, I don't know. That is interesting, though.
I would say this about that, is that all of their perspective on government is that it's too bureaucratic to get anything done, and they're more loyal to their private fraternal university connections than they are to their business ones.
Right.
And,
Absolutely.
and so they pledge allegiance in college to each other. Phi Beta Kappa is the oldest fraternal society, secret society in America. And
Mhm.
I think, and this is where I get into speculation, I believe that, this Phi Beta Kappa and Skull and Bones here in the West is connected directly back to, Bavarian or uh, the Skull and Bones in Germany,
Yeah, I
because
would
that's really where everything
guarantee it.
else is coming from. So it would only make
Mhm.
sense that that is who's driving that. And so what we are getting at here too is that it's not, we're trying to drive through Brandeis here. Okay.
Mhm.
And we're going to identify him as a person of interest, but I want to know who's steering the Brandeises and who's steering this move to the West and what's driving this creation of such a, you know, influential person.
Right.
So Brandeis was thought of by Wilson as his obvious pick for Attorney General or Secretary of Commerce before he was elected Supreme Court Justice. Brandeis telling Rabbi Stephen Weiss he needed Brandeis everywhere. So this is the influence that Brandeis has on Wilson.
Jesus.
Brandeis is
Wow.
today touted as the very architect of the new freedom, Wilson's 1912 progressive platform. We argue when Brandeis traveled to meet the president, he had already formulated his progressive plan and knew exactly what he was doing. From that initial introductory meeting at Seagert, Wilson leaned heavily on the expertise of Brandeis, whose opinions on economic questions he respected above all others.
Wow.
Those are in quote marks. So, because
Wow.
Brandeis understood the problem thoroughly, this trust issue, the monopolies, because he was ready
Mhm.
with a definite plan for the bridling of monopoly, he became the chief architect of the new freedom. So we're just now substantiating, all of his biographers are saying that he is the architect of the new freedom. They're saying this all in the exact same terminology too.
Do you
So
think
we
this
can
is
take that
all,
forward.
as you said a little earlier, this isn't that deep in,
Mhm.
you can find this obviously. And it's like, do you think they're just relying so heavily on the brainwashing that people will find all this and still just
Yep.
look at all of them as heroes of social
Yes,
justice? Yeah.
obviously,
Yeah.
obviously, because
Like it
even just
doesn't look
before,
like evidence. It looks like praise.
yeah,
Or yeah, or
well,
just at least like, you know, you know what I mean though? Like with a brainwashed mind, almost nothing that we're alluding to here. It's like, well, yeah, they were putting together this new amazing science-led society. So it's
yeah,
so unfortunate that like to people like us, this is gonna, set a light off in the brain. But
mhm,
hopefully this the fact that this is also such detailed and like forensic evidence at this point,
yeah,
hopefully it'll cross the barriers.
yep. And I would say that in the Walter Lippmann uh, conference that they had in 2022, it was really um, a call to arms.
Hmm.
It's the Columbia School of Journalism, and they're the ones that consider Lippmann the father of modern journalism, and they're the ones advocating for a government uh, and a society run by scientific expert. And
Right.
some of these guys uh, talk about how the expert is actually being attacked from both sides, and they name the Jesuit uh, leader of COVID messaging. What was his name? Fauci.
Fauci,
And
yes.
they name him as really a lightning rod for both the right and the left,
Interesting.
which was kind of an eye opener. So this is why they're having this meeting, is because they're wondering about the health and the prospects of longevity for the idea of the expert here in the West.
Right, right. It's
So
incredible.
the centerpieces of this new freedom were the creation of the Federal Trade Commission and the Federal Reserve Board. The Fed, a centralized banking scheme independent of the government based on lending money at interest that has led to a collective debt so large and crippling as to render an entire nation paralyzed by a forever growing debt clock. The Federal Trade Commission, a regulatory institution that has since its benevolent inception expanded into a vast network of surveillance and monitoring well beyond its originally publicly stated intentions. So we're seeing Brandeis institute usury, speculation, and surveillance,
Yeah.
And so as we get into this, you're going to see that the thoughts of surveillance and the thoughts of all of these things go way back, and they are deep into philosophy and different philosophical thinkers throughout history. And so we're going to introduce people to Bentham and Comte's positivism. And so they
Yes.
establish all of this. And you talk about how they keep people away from this. This is how, because it's
Mm,
all a psychological operation. It's
yeah.
all a way to keep us psychologically away from the things that they don't want us to see, like this. And so
Mhm.
that's how they're using television. And so they look at this. Another thing that I pulled out of this Walter Lippmann conference was that they look at uh, today as um, attracting our attention spans as the new oil,
Hmm.
right?
That's amazing.
just
Yeah.
just like information was the new oil like 6 7 years ago, now our attention is. And so as long as they have your attention, we lose. And that's a very basic way to look at it. As long as you're staring at the TV, man, we lose,
Right.
because we're addicted to the pseudo environment, and we're looking at things that aren't real.
Yeah. Just distractions constantly.
And that is a direct development. This is like the furthest extent of the imagination of men like Walter Lippmann and Sidney Webb, this world that we live in today, just where we're, you know, for them, it would have been a dream to have this technical device that we all have in our pocket.
Yeah. Oh,
It
yeah.
controls us even in our even in our most bored moments. You know, what do we turn to but this phone? And what is it? But it just is reaffirmations of pseudo environment.
Yeah, like Marshall McLuhan back in the
Right.
50s talking about how mankind was like the sex organs of the machine world, the future machine world. And it's like at the time when I read that quote a long time ago, it was like, I think it was like Terence McKenna saying that quote. Um, you take it one way, but now looking back, I wonder how, possibly connected that guy was to certain individuals and institutions and kind of pushing that idea into the public sphere. Like, this is happening, will be secondary, or you will
Yeah,
be
it's really
secondary.
it's really legitimizing media when he says the media is the message.
Right,
Right.
absolutely. And another thing about the scientific, like ruled by a council of experts. Um,
Yep.
Again, that's not like we're talking about being played by both sides here. Like, the typical counterculture, more right leaning, a little center, Joe Rogan people, all of them, including him, constantly talk about being ruled by a group of like philosophical experts, how that would be a much better way of doing things. And, he's so connected to Jordan Peterson and all these characters who want to take out the WEF and rise up with a better way. And it's like, this
So
seems
then,
like we're walking right into it.
right. And so then that is controlled opposition, because
Bingo.
what is that but the political philosopher that they're talking about? And
Yep.
so that is now George Santayana, Harvard uh, professor that taught Walter Lippmann.
Hmm.
Okay. And so their dream, what I see, because Lippmann was training under William James, the father of, or the creator of pragmatism, and George Santayana, the guy that wanted a political philosopher.
Hmm.
And so what comes out of there, but Walter Lippmann, really a political philosopher. So these are influencers of society. And I would say Jordan Peterson is one great example of these people today,
Yep. Absolutely.
because he's got intellectual high ground nearly on everybody. Even if he's wrong, he sounds right.
Oh, it's disgusting too.
Yeah, it is
He's
watching
obnoxious, but
him.
yeah, he is. He's like a wordsmith in a
Yep.
way. Yeah.
Yeah, and I credit him with a lot of what I've done. Like I took his writing program, and
Hmm.
he really inspired me to get off my ass and do something. But ever since he went away for a while and he was sick, I swear to God, he had a lobotomy or something, and he's come back totally dark, totally different. He's affiliated now with Shapiro and the Daily Wire or whatever,
Yeah.
and
He's gone.
everything coming out of Jordan Peterson is dark.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
well,
Depressing and scary and apocalyptic.
I would take everything about Jordan Peterson up until about COVID, and then after that, throw it all away, as far as I
Makes
can
sense.
see.
Yep.
And so, uh, the many committees, commissions, and councils created by Brandeis during the Wilson administration's first term, representing the actual manifestation of Lippmann's proposed intelligence bureaus, an essential part of Graham Wallace's futuristic utopian great society, or Sidney Webb's scientifically governed industrial democracy. So we've talked about that. And
Yep.
so through the founding first of these regulatory agencies led by Brandeis, we see the very first glimpses into the administrative state. And so Lester Frank Ward is the guy that's credited with creating the welfare state. And we're going to get back to him in later episodes in the creation of our system of law, or our philosophy of modern law, because
Hmm.
he's knee deep there too. So think about that. Lester Frank Ward, the founder of the welfare state,
Hmm.
was very involved here. So I
Makes
remember,
sense.
grandparents talking about the welfare state and FDR being a socialist president. And we see that that's exactly what's happened. We're starting to really enforce all of that with substantiation, with provenance, with receipts. And history doesn't start with FDR. It goes, this all begins with Woodrow Wilson. And as we will show nearing the end of all of this, Louis Brandeis is influencing FDR. FDR actually calls Louis Brandeis Isaiah.
Wow, that's an interesting
Yep, that's his
little
nickname for
nickname.
him. Yep, that's what he calls Louis Brandeis, Isaiah.
Wow.
So we see here we're just substantiating again. Wilson had intended his Secretary of Commerce to be one of America's staunchest progressives. His advisor, Louis D. Brandeis, earliest mention of his name, however, incited considerable protest. Politicians, businessmen, and attorneys denounced him as a radical, a reckless meddler. So they knew of him back in the day. Obviously, he was the people's attorney. You know, the first decade of the 1900s, he really became prominent and nationally known around 1908 to 1910, and then he
Mm.
parlays all of this into you know running Wilson's administration. And so they said that the new freedom called for a new declaration of independence, to give you an idea of what they were thinking.
Hmm.
Right, so they're actually trying to, and Brandeis mentions this several times, and these are the words that he uses, to experiment on the US Constitution. And so what we are doing essentially there is taking in the US Constitution, you have immovable laws, you know, rights and freedoms, privileges that aren't supposed to be screwed with, right? Like
Hmm.
our ability to speak, our ability to think for ourselves. Those things should never be, considered in any other way. And they apply living law, a philosophy of living law, to accompany this progressive, always moving society. And so they needed to imply social sciences as the feedback loop, and that's fairly um, convoluted, I suppose. But if anybody understands what the feedback loop is,
Mm.
again, go back to House of Truth or the Future Perfect series, where we talk about the creation of surface to air missiles. This
Hmm.
is really where this comes from. If you think about a missile trying to hit a target moving in the air, it needs constant information feedback uh, in accordance to its location in relation to its target. And so, Norbert Wiener discovered that this feedback loop was the way to steer missiles and hit their target. And then they applied this to social sciences and to society.
Yeah.
And so, what social sciences are is that feedback. They are constantly researching humans, they're researching society, and then the applied science is where they apply it. And so we are living in a giant experiment. This is one of you talk about it being dark. I think the dark aspect of this is really coming to grips with our true reality, and that is that we have been in experiment our entire lives. Law, sociology is the study of society. The new school for social research, and all of these social science research institutions, that's what they are doing. And we are constantly under investigation. And so the social engineers, the high level grand strategists, are crunching those numbers and reapplying them as best as they can to steer society as one
Right.
would a ship, right? We go back to the definitions of government and cybernetics.
Yeah, being one and the same. And the new way now, it's like going from Project MK Ultra to what people would consider Monarch, taking it to an open source level where everything is manufactured consent now. We sign our own experimental permissions away, or whatever you want to say. We sign the release forms to be a part of the experiment without really taking stock of what we're a part of.
Yeah. Yeah. And so here's one of the more powerful quotes from this article. And this is taken from, as you see there, Julie Brill. She was commissioner of the United States Federal Trade Commission during Obama's years 2010 to 2016. And she's speaking at an address before the International Association of Privacy Professionals in 2011, a speech called From the Woods to the Weeds. We all know Louis Brandeis is one of the most influential justices on the Supreme Court, but fewer of you may know that he was also the person who conceived the Federal Trade Commission. So conceiving it is from his mind.
Yeah.
Right? And there's the commissioner of the FTC saying, giving Louis Brandeis 100% sole responsibility and credit for creating the FTC. Now, his biographers are sort of all in degrees of agreement with that, but I would say that it's all Brandeis.
Wow.
And so see where she is now. She's now Chief Privacy Officer and Corporate Vice President for Global Privacy, Safety, and Regulatory Affairs at Microsoft.
Of course.
So here
That's
we
so
are.
perfect.
Yeah. And so Brill fits the pattern of everyone else in this story. You're going to see, after graduating magna cum laude with a BA in economics from Ivy League at Princeton, she then goes back and forth between public duty as commissioner of the FTC and chief privacy officer at Microsoft. Here, Brill exhibiting a conflict of interest through public-private partnerships made commonplace during Brandeis's time. So really what this is fascism.
Yeah.
A public-private partnership. You're starting to get, the government and corporations working together, and we're not sure who's monitoring who. Well, that is what Mussolini called his corporatism. So, and we see that directly parallel with the relationship, the love affair that America had with Mussolini, starting in early, 1920s, 21, 22.
Right. And it's all these things are just inversions if you look at them the right way. The Federal Trade Commission being an independent agency, it's like enforcing civil antitrust law and consumer protection and things like that. It's all inversions. It's not,
Yeah, they talk about it being created for the man on the make, not the made man.
Right there, yeah.
Regulations, right? And so they're regulating the man on the make, the ordinary man, the sovereign citizen, the ordinary citizen of society. These are to regulate him, not those that have already made their money. So you can see that they're already sort of separating a little in their language. But yep, you're right. It's all like today. They use nice sounding words and they present ideals of ways that they would like to see things, and not necessarily a lot of thought in regards to whether they're, first of all, possible, and this is really the unattainable ideal and the noble lie.
Yeah.
This is how they use that. So
1000%.
Solicitor General once told the lawyer George Farnham that when Mr. Brandeis writes an opinion dealing with a question of federal practice, the law is settled for 50 years to come. While this may be somewhat exaggerated, Brandeis did have a great impact not only on jurisdictional matters, but on commercial law, antitrust, administrative law, utility regulation, federalism, and individual liberties. So he's crossing the board here. It's a comprehensive installation of this new idea, society governed by the scientific expert. And so here's Julie Brill again saying the Federal Trade Commission is the brainchild of Louis D. Brandeis.
Wow.
Later in that same speech. So when the FTC opened its doors in March 1915, it had become the surprising centerpiece of Wilson's antitrust program. During the 1912 campaign, Theodore Roosevelt had been the advocate for a strong commission. Roosevelt, who launched a short-lived Progressive Party, would even have allowed an agency to set prices. Wilson was skeptical of a commission in 1912 and remained skeptical when he launched his antitrust initiative in January 1914. He proposed a purely investigatory body. But when the initiative bogged down, he was persuaded by Louis Brandeis and George Rubley, a friend to Brandeis and a former Roosevelt advisor, Theodore there, to embrace part of the progressive program, Section 5's administratively enforced prohibition of unfair methods of competition. So there is your general term that they used under which everything can fall. Unfair methods of competition. That's what they are looking into enforcing. Right?
Jesus.
So it's very ambiguous, just like today.
Right, yeah. All these
which,
very vague concepts that they can kind of put whatever they want into.
Yeah, because they're very vague about it at the time. They're not really sure as to where all of this will go.
True.
Brandeis is just broaching the idea of wiretapping. And so as a presidential advisor, Brandeis convinced the president, Congress, the Supreme Court, and the American people to accept radical new approaches to everything from labor legislation and trade unionism to life insurance and public utility, from trust busting and women's suffrage to conservation. Brandeis introducing to America new terms like scientific management, regulated competition, industrial relations, standard cost accounting, trade agreement monitoring, resale price maintenance, interlocking directorates, and so on. Brandeis, more than anyone else, is responsible for placing the first foundational building blocks of our modern surveillance state through his introduction of a vast network of regulatory agencies. Now, that's me saying that. And so that is what we're seeing. This is how the administrative state was created. Supreme Court justice acting as a radical, really, nothing holding him back. So as we get closer to the end here, we'll just summarize this to his activities. As an attorney, Brandeis established a radical new method of arguing law, and once confirmed justice, transferred this method to the Supreme Court, making even our Supreme Court justices social activists. He opened the door to an entirely new interpretation of U.S. law through sociological jurisprudence, and as a concerned Jewish American, Brandeis almost unfathomably rises through the rank and file to lead American Zionism to their ultimate goal of gaining a homeland in Palestine. Brandeis crucial in persuading the Christian evangelical movement, now numbering over 100 million today, to offer its support for a new Zion by befriending key founders of dispensationalism and the Christian fundamental movement. So we're going to get into that in future episodes, how that all went down. Because when you think about it, as the Zionist leader, they were trying to raise support for a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Well, they got the Christian evangelicals and Presbyterians and really the whole Christian movement here in America to back that whole idea. And how they did that was inserting the scientific expert into the Bible. Really, that's what C.I. Schofield Bible is. It's the first Bible with footnotes.
And we're going to be talking about the Schofield Bible in this series, I assume. It's going to be coming up.
And we are going to get there. It's one of the later episodes, and it's one of the later ones because it's about the philosophies and a lot of these catchwords. And so this is why I like that we've done it a week apart, these shows, and that we're doing an accompanying video, because we can explain these terms and make them easy to understand, like dual loyalty. I think we all know what dual loyalty is. We see that, he's there at the nexus of the creation of that whole idea too, at least in modern times. So go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, and right now, shout out to the folks watching live. We got 4 people watching right now. We've had more throughout the hour, but for now, thank you so much. And throughout this series, I'm hopefully this will inspire some questions or some comments that come up throughout. And if that's the case, we can kind of do a little Q&A there on that aspect as well. For sure.
Questions down. I asked that on Facebook today for anybody that wants to join the conversation. Definitely throw down some questions or anything where that you can add to emphasize what we're saying here.
Yeah, we'll be definitely taking each of these episodes live for the
Cool.
next 10 weeks. Unless something comes up, we got to
Yeah.
skip a week, so be it. But
Yep.
the trajectory is to do this over the next 10 weeks. It might stay the same day of the week. I don't know. We'll figure it out.
Yeah. To the best of our ability is what I said. So
Yes.
we're gonna commit to getting it done. And we're gonna try to be as consistent as we can
Yeah, this
for
is a
everybody.
story worth hearing all the way through
Man.
and taking in
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. And so as a mediator in the creation of labor law, because he was an attorney in the first decade of 1900s, he combined scientific management with industrial relations in bringing together employee and employer. Brandeis surrounding himself with key members of the Taylor Society in directing the nascent moments of our modern day industrial democracy. So once we get into the
Wow.
scientific management, you'll see that he's creating the industrial democracy too. And to do that, he needed a government that was, you know, applicable or, relatable.
Right.
Like they had to fit together. Right.
And they
And so when
all
you think
do.
about, you have to have a superstructure to build everything else onto. And really the administrative state had to come first. And then
Mhm.
you see that they've systematically just built this. So Brandeis here displaying a pattern we see repeated in each of the stories to follow by gaining influence over and then becoming the guiding hand to a newly discovered technology and the small but very influential group of men that created it. Brandeis radically altered the old traditional definitions of American life in ways we are only now coming to terms with.
Wow.
So
This
Louis
is
Brandeis, sorry?
no, go ahead.
Okay, Louis Brandeis conceptualized regulated competition. This is another one of these terms that we need to sort of familiarize ourselves with. This is
Mhm.
another vague term. This is really what he based it on was regulated competition and introduced it into public debate. Political entrepreneurs in Congress enacted many of Brandeis's proposals into law. So Brandeis formulated a blueprint for a federal trade commission from his experience with railroad regulation. That's going back to his attorney days.
Mhm.
And he's really establishing how railroads operate, how working 8-hour days and 5-day work weeks. He's establishing all of this infrastructure that we have today.
Mm.
So
Yeah, a
when
lot of
Woodrow,
these things we complain about and say these are manufactured parts of society now. Like, where did these things come from?
Mhm.
Mostly Brandeis.
Yeah, we're seeing that it's mostly from Brandeis.
Mhm.
So when Woodrow Wilson, as Theodore Roosevelt had done, was looking to promote his agenda on the Council of Brandeis, he opted for commissions. Commissions had the power and the merit of regulating industry and avoiding the need for direct legislative intervention. So you can see that they're trying to stay out of government entanglements. Commissions rather than committees. So I guess committees are connected somehow to the government, and you have to answer to um, the people, whereas
Mm.
commissions are just
Right.
businessmen, and they're making decisions on the bottom line.
Which is how everything's run.
Yep, nowadays. And so Brandeis decomposed scientific management in 19th century common law and recombined their parts in a syncretic blueprint for a federal trade commission. And syncretic, I looked that up, and what that is combining two things.
Mm.
And so we are seeing that he's doing that. So uh, with scientific management and industrial relations, when we look at putting people into factories, the workers repelled the the thought of being perfected and being scientifically managed, to carry the ultimate amount of soil in a wheelbarrow and all of these things that were being implemented into uh, into their pursuit of certainty.
Mhm.
They wanted efficiency. So this preparedness movement, or sorry, the progressive movement is really, it has two backbones to it. And one's the preparedness movement and one's the efficiency movement. And so they're preaching efficiency of the human being, but also the factory. And so you can imagine that people were not happy with being forced into factories. A lot of people were living agrarian lifestyles on their own land at this point, and this move into the city and into factories, there were wars. People fought against this. And so this is what industrial relations was. Is Robert Grosvenor Valentine, the owner of Harvard, or the owner of House of Truth, is the guy that comes up with industrial democracy, or sorry, industrial relations. And so he's making it, they come to the conclusion that the employee will never join this agreement with the employer as long as they feel like it's the employer's idea and the employer is the only one to benefit. Right? So that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so they said, okay, we're going to get into a cooperative relationship where the worker is going to participate and share in the profits. And so we can see today that that's, this is the beauty about hindsight. We've had 100 years of it. And so these things never happened.
Right.
We see today that, the workers dominated and at the whim of his employer now more than then. Nobody today really works their entire life at the same place like they did even back then, which was one of the benefits of this whole lifestyle, is that you did have security throughout your life. But we, the children of their future now, can sit here and look at these conclusions and hash them out pretty easily because we've had 100 years to look. I mean, the FTC and the Federal Reserve are pretty obvious problems for society. When we've constructed a debt clock in Times Square or whatever in New York that never stops, and it's like a tourist attraction, we've got problems.
Yeah, that's messed up. It's, falling in love with our downfall, which is, I believe, another manufactured mentality that's kind of been pushed into our psyches over the last century, and it doesn't fall far away from the frankest ideal either. This profane society.
Right. Yep. So insofar as the career of a single person illustrates both the problems that led to the FTC's creation and the reasons for its subsequent failure, that person is Louis D. Brandeis, the most influential critic of trust during his generation. Brandeis served from 1912 until 1916 as Woodrow Wilson's chief economic advisor and was regarded as one of the architects of the FTC. So we're just substantiating. You're seeing the provenance that we're using, Profits of Regulation. Okay. And so these books are found online. We do try to keep up and have these on the bulletproofpub.com website in our library. But this research, being as fresh as it is, we haven't been able to do that. But, go to archive.org for any of this.
Yeah.
Right? Go to archive.org. As long as these books aren't in print, they're going to be there 99% of the time. And one thing I want to actually say here too is that whenever I get to books about Brandeis, I can't just simply save image as and put it into a folder. I have to take screenshots and put two pieces together, put it into Paint, and it takes me about 3 minutes per picture per page to put together. And so I'm seeing that there's a gate there. Archive.org is excellent in that, for the most part, you can go there and just right click on the page and up comes your little tab and it says save image as, and you can just put that away in a second.
Absolutely.
But anytime I come around Brandeis, it's to the point where I totally predict it now. It's like there's nothing there. They don't help you at all. And a lot of times these books aren't available. And the only way I'm getting these quotes is because I know some of the names and the situation, so I can put in keyword searches and then unveil a lot of the book that they, generally aren't willing to give us. So,
well, this kind of reminds me of that's a great point, and it kind of harkens back to a conversation that you and I believe it was when Andy Gerard was with us. We have talked about, the book burnings back in the early 20th century, and how controlled, like it was like a kind of a controlled opposition situation there too, because you find out it's like, sure, a lot of people's books were being burned at that time, like Huxley and things like that. And when I was growing up, and I apologize, we did talk about this on a previous episode, but just to reiterate, growing up as kind of like an open-minded, psychedelic-driven hippie kind of guy, And oh yeah, fuck the government kind of guy.
Yeah.
Aldous Huxley is one of our traditional heroes, or supposedly. And that's just rehashing old info. People definitely need to check out the articles you've written at bulletproofpub.com on Aldous Huxley as well, like his whole influence and being a centerpiece as well. So it's really great to see all these different key figures. We're going to have to make trophies for all of them and honor them in a way that no one has been honored before, in the most profane fucking way.
Well, I think that's what we're going to do here.
Hang them
we're going to
high.
try to be sophisticated. We're going to show them that, we can be sophisticated and we can learn things. And a lot of this whole movement by them is because they don't think that we're good enough. And I
Right.
would say that you can't claim that while taking our education away. So, I want to see what happens when we have the education that they removed. And
Mhm.
I'm trying to be an example of just how powerful and how influential we can be. And I'm not saying I am, but here we are. And I'm, revealing some information that over the last 100 years, not many people have found. And I'm talking about mainstream and independent media. For whatever reason, this whole epoch has
Yeah.
been buried. And so, it first started with stumbling upon the House of Truth, a political salon, and I didn't even really understand the power that is behind political salons and the reasons why they exist. But then I found out that this goes back to, the French Revolution, and this is how these radical liberals really gather and create schemes, is in their own private homes, away from everybody else, in conclaves. And so you speak of Huxley, and he's really one of the progenitors of this idea of political salons in LA. So we wrote an article about the political salons in Los Angeles, and how they overtook film noir, and they've been using Hollywood since day one on a demoralization program. And if you doubt me, go look at the first movies that are ever made, even the ones with no speaking in them.
Mhm.
Fritz Lang's Metropolis, it's pretty dark and it's pretty futuristic. And so,
Yeah. Trip to the moon.
these are the things that we're unveiling, man, is that a lot of this, I mean, I always go back to that saying where there's no easy way to tell somebody they've been living an illusion their entire life. And really that's what they've done. And our generation, and I would include you and I in that. I mean, we're reasonably the same. We were born into this.
Yeah.
And so, it takes a little bit to see it. And
Oh, yeah.
so that's what we're trying to do.
Especially when most of your heroes are part of it too, and I know I get hung up on that aspect a lot, but it
Yeah.
burns in me, and
Well, this is part of having a reasonable deductive process and having a singular focus on the truth, is that you're aware of your prejudice filters, right? And what is prejudice? Prejudice, but just prejudging,
right.
looking, like judging a book by its cover, thinking we know something, yet we're filled with ignorance on the topic.
Right.
These aspects of looking at ourselves, being better, this is really where we're focusing. So
Yeah, as within, so without, the individual to the whole society. I mean, we need to do this as a society, just as individuals face their own traumas and grow as individuals over time. It's like you have to check your lack of discernment, your, wow, I never used to even think about my behavior there. Like all these things, we will be doing this on a societal level as well. But not through social programming. We're going to be doing it through hard, cold reality hitting us in the face, whether it's slowly but surely or all at once or a little bit of both. And I hope we can provide that throughout this series,
Yeah. And I think I like to keep our arguments on a human level, because they can't divide us there, and
Absolutely.
you can't argue against it.
That's
So
right.
this is probably a great place to end
Yeah.
episode
Yeah.
one,
Yeah.
and sort of give an introduction to who Louis Brandeis was, and to sort of give us a good stepping off place now. You know,
Absolutely.
we're in Woodrow Wilson's administration, showing just how influential he is on a domestic level. Now we get to branch off from here and show just the other avenues that he goes down, and ends up, you know, really steering everything in Paris on an international level.
Right.
Okay, so there's a giant end game here that
And
we've
this,
just begun tonight. So
yeah, this is so exciting. And this picture is going to, you know, it's going to be like one of those slowly rendering images, and it's just going to be like boom. And yeah, I'm going to be sharing this far and wide, and hoping to get a lot more people checking it out next week.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
this will be on the podcast feed as well. Maybe not right away, but I will get it all figured out this week, and we'll have a kind of a uniformity to this whole situation over the
Yeah,
next
it
weeks
seemed
and everything.
it seemed to be fine.
Heck
Everything worked tickety boo, on your end.
yeah, it actually did. It was pretty good. The only this is my first live ever, so I mean, it went pretty good considering, and I appreciate everybody that came on and checked it out live. And yeah, everybody who's listening or watching after the fact, appreciate you, and see you next time. Duane, thank you as always for being here, man. Appreciate the work
Everybody
you're
bring
doing.
a friend next week, Bring a friend
Yeah,
next week.
please do. Yeah, and ask some questions. You know, and study up if you're interested in this stuff. If you want to know these answers, like look into some of this stuff. Go to bulletproofpub.com. Check out a lot of Duane's articles. Cross-reference what he's saying with your own research. And it's a fulfilling process.
Yeah, we got a lot of people. We got a lot of people in the background just really, sending us a lot of information, helping us out too, and discovering along the way with us. So we're just, trying to grab more and more people on a mission towards the truth. So thank you, Andy Rouse, for giving us an opportunity to do that tonight. Looking forward to the next few weeks.
Yes, me too. Looking forward to it. Everybody have a great week. See you next time.
Human sacrifice, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria. Enough, I get the point.
You have meddled with the primal forces of nature. And you will atone.
What do we know? What do we know? If I know what we know, then I can tell you what we know, and if someone else knows, okay? I mean...